done as to the economic effect, as John Sullivan, my friend from Oklahoma, has brought before this House. This is called the EPA Regulatory Relief Act. This has to do with Boiler Mac. Hospitals, factories, colleges, thousands of major American employers use boilers that will be impacted by the EPA's new Boiler Mac rules. These new stringent rules will impose billions of dollars in capital and compliance costs, increase the cost of many goods and services, and put over 200,000 American jobs at risk. The American forest and paper industry, for example, will see an additional burden of at least $5 to $7 billion. Morgan Griffin of Virginia has this bill, which provides a legislative stay of the 4 interrelated rules issued by EPA this March of this year. This legislation would also provide EPA with at least 15 months to repropose and finalize new regulations that are achievable and do not destroy jobs and provide employers with the ability to extend compliance on these rules. These rules as they stand are business-killing rules today. 200,000 people will lose their jobs if these rules are implemented, and this will be brought up in October, around the 3rd of October, and that week, to basically put a hold on these job-killing regulations. The President himself said, we need to examine regulations and see how they're going to kill jobs. Well, here's one right here, Mr. President, 200,000 jobs. At a minimum, will be lost, maybe forever, and cost of $5 to $7 billion in just one industry. Now, that's money that's capital that's being put into a different project than building and expanding your business. And that means instead of hiring people, you're laying off people. Now, why in the world, in the environment where we have 9.1% unemployment, we've been teetering around 10% now for almost a year, why in the world would we want to have these people who work for us in the government? They're not elected. They're appointed people. They're hired, just like anybody else, that are out there thinking up ways to shut off people, good, honest, hard-working men and women in this country's jobs because of some concept they have on making an improvement. Let's make improvements. Let's keep our environment clean, but let's do it in a way that remembers that we're part of the environment too. Let me check. How much time we got left? 15?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. This is something I've worked on. I've worked on it now for almost 6 months. This is the cement, and John Sullivan is doing it, who has been working with us on this, is bringing this up that week of October 3rd. The Cement MAC and 2 related rules are expected to affect approximately 100 cement plants in America. Now, when we say cement, we're talking about a process that makes that powder and gravel and sand that if you go to the I won't advertise for anybody, but if you go to one of these stores that sells stuff for construction, you'll see these sacks of stuff that say something Crete, Cement Crete or something in it. And in that sack is a bunch of stuff, and you add water to it, and you make concrete. Okay, gardeners use it. Everybody uses it. On a bigger scale, you pour slabs for foundations for buildings. On an even bigger scale, you put special reinforced steel in the cement pour, the concrete pour, and you make pre-stressed concrete walls, which most of our big buildings in this country and around the world are built with. In fact, concrete is the #2 building material in the world. The #1 building material in the world is water. So of the elements that are used in building things, Portland cement is number 2. And it's the process that makes the powder that binds it to make concrete. Now this is our process. We discovered it, we did it, we originated the pre-stressed concrete that many of these buildings here in Washington, D.C. that aren't marble are built out of. And yet, our regulatory process has the potential to drive anywhere from a third to a half of all the cement manufacturers, the people that make the powder that binds the concrete, out of the country. Now, we're doing it for the good of the environment, right? Well, we've got scrubbers on our cement plants, and we've got lots of things we have cleaned up in our cement process, but our competitors in China and India have nothing. I mean, zero. They don't have anything to do with cleaning up the environment. So is it really going to clean up the world's, all the way around the world's environment by taking it away from a place that does it right and put it in a place that does it wrong? But a $7 billion industry could cost as much as $5 billion to fix these regulations. Put a pencil to that. I mean, they're worth $7 billion, and $5 billion more have to be put into it. And the only solution that many of them see is just close down the plants in the United States, fire the people that are there. I don't know, what kind of jobs are these? Lowest paid man that works at a Portland cement factory makes around $65,000 a year, laborer. And then the technicians get up in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are not minimum wage jobs. These are the kind of jobs that every American dreams about. The kind of jobs that every family dreams is the basis of their family. And because of the regulatory analysis of some people they have decided that they're going to impose regulations that basically drive these people off to Mexico or to China or to India. And they bring up issues like mercury. But studies, their own people's studies show that the majority of the mercury that's in the air right now in the United States comes from China and India. Because they don't clean things up over there, and it blows over here from China and India. So we're going to make it better by sending more over to China and India? I don't think so. But what about the American jobs that are here? What if they let these people thrive? If they thrive, building materials stay reasonable. We're not having to ship building materials from China to build our next house, to pour our next concrete slab. And so what happens? Price of everything goes up. Can we afford that next house? Who knows? This is what regulations do. It is a compounding effect. It costs us jobs. I see one of the smartest men in Congress here, Mr. Gohmert over there. Is he here to talk on a different subject? Well, I know you're smart enough to talk about this one if you want to. Louis is one of my colleagues from Texas, and I'm proud to call him my friend. Let's go to the next one. Well, we don't even have a board for this, but let me say something. I was telling you about South Texas and the jobs that they're creating down there. Just to give you an example of how excited people are about that find of natural gas in South Texas. Now remember, Texans are oil and gas people. Remember this too. When Texas came in the Union as a country, we had a special treaty which let us keep our public lands. So the federal government doesn't tell us what we do with our land in Texas because we own our public lands. And all this land that's going to be drilled on in South Texas is owned by people, not by the federal government. So they can't keep us from leasing our land out to drill these wells. Now, they can keep us from using the process it takes to break up that shell to capture this gas. And that's what they're trying to do. Now, we created an energy department in this country, I forget, 30 years ago, and its goal was to make us energy independent in our lifetime. Well, I don't know whose lifetime it was, but some of those people are already dead. Because the truth is, we're farther from being energy dependent than the day they created the Energy Department. Way farther. At that time, less than 30% or 40% of our oil and gas came from overseas. Now we're in the 80 percentile range. Now, why in the world, when we know that we've got it, and we know we're going to use it, we have to use it, why would we keep buying it from Saudi Arabia and places like that hate us, like Venezuela and other places? Why don't we just get what we got? Go down there and get what we got. Out in the Gulf and in South Texas and in the great state of Pennsylvania, where they've got a huge shale gas find. They got a huge, and ask those people how they like that shale gas. They love it. 25,000 jobs have been created in that part of Pennsylvania in the last year and a half. This same shale goes into New York, and it's going other places. So there are jobs that gets created by this. But here's another peripheral thing, because there's no place to stay in South Texas. We're just a bunch of little bitty towns down there. Big hotel firms are coming down there and building hotels down there because they see this to be a long-term operation down there, and it's worth them investing in building hotels and motels so the people who are working down there will have a place to stay. What comes with that? Restaurants. What comes with that? Washaterias and all the other things that you need to have people grow. And then when the people settle, what's the first thing they're looking for? An apartment or a house to live in. They get tired of staying in a hotel. One company, I won't use their name, one company went down to South Texas and leased a whole 8-story hotel for 2 years. That's how convinced they are this is going to be an economic boom in South Texas. Why would we ever want to stop that? And yet, there are people who are continuously bombarding this industry and saying that this terrible shale fracking process is poisoning the water supply. But there's no evidence, real evidence, that proves that. And by the way, anybody that tells you they can smell it in their water don't know what they talk about, because natural gas doesn't smell. It smells in your house because they put a chemical in there that makes it smell. So you can know when your gas is leaking. But it doesn't smell when it comes out of the ground. I've worked in that industry as a kid. I had the crummy job of actually digging up one of those smell machines that puts a smell in natural gas, and I can testify under oath. It's the foulest smelling stuff you ever saw, but they have a machine that puts it in your gas so you can smell it when it goes into your home. So there's a lot of people that are just being crazy over some of these issues. Look at this, coal. First of all, I was talking tonight at supper with one of our members from Kentucky, and he said they've issued 2 coal mining permits in the last 2 years, I think he said, in one of the largest coal mining areas in the entire country. They're doing everything they possibly can to kill the coal industry, and yet we have an abundance of coal, and clean up the coal process has been the goal of the coal industry in the power manufacturing world. We have some states like Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, those things along the Ohio River, those states there, and many of the states on the East Coast, and even this city, have coal power plants. In fact, in some places, the predominant power plant is a coal power plant. Now, if they shut those down and take them offline, how are we going to have enough electricity for everybody? We already worry about brownouts and blackouts when we have hot weather. How are we going to have the electricity if we're going to take away the natural resources? And who's going to take it away? A vote of this Congress? No. We've had that vote. It didn't happen. A guy who works for the government that sits in his little office in a cubicle and decides that he doesn't think we ought to have coal? Should he be able to write, he and a group of people be able to write a regulation that shuts down that whole industry based on possibly bad science? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. Do we all want to sit around in the dark as we ponder it? Because if we shut off what we use to power our power industry, we won't have any electrical power. This is for the residuals. I guess it's the ash is the best word I can say. Now, what in the world is anybody worried about coal ash for? Well, I think everybody in this room, if they don't have sheetrock in their house, there's something probably strange about it, because most everybody has what we in our part of the world call sheetrock. Now, up here they may call it wallboards. Well, sheetrock, part of the component of sheetrock is coal ash. And yet there's a regulation that creates an enforceable minimal standard for the this bill creates an enforceable minimal standard and allows coal ash to be used in the products it's being used in with appropriate studies. If they do the pending rules for coal ash, there's another 1,000 jobs that's going to be lost. So just in our talk tonight, there's 300,000 jobs. We're almost through this stuff, and there's plenty more. I've just got 10 of the hundreds that have been passed in just the last 2 months of new regulations. These are just 10. But in these short 10, now we're at over 300,000 jobs lost when these regulations will go into effect. And most of these are current events. This will happen before the end of the year, or certainly before the middle of next year. So as we are trying to create jobs, we're losing them as fast as we can create them. And why? Because of regulations. Now, we can regulate without shutting things down. There's a smart way to do things, and there's a stupid way to do things. Let's do it the smart way. Let's get the politics, and by politics I mean the environmental politics, out of this process, and let's get off to where we need to be, and that is, what do we need, how do we accomplish it, and how do we keep people working while we do it? If we can do that, which is certainly not flying to the moon, it's less complicated than that. If we can do that, we can start solving the job problem we've got in this country, because we can put people back to work. I'll give you one final example that we don't have a board on. I'm going to use the last board. I talked earlier about people who have franchises. Well, if you wanted to buy a McDonald's hamburger franchise for your hometown, I don't know what it costs, but it's not cheap, because it's a money-making business. And when you bought it, you'd be a small business owner. You'd own one McDonald's store. I think that'd be a pretty good definition of a small business owner. Now, we have written the regulation. There's more pages in that regulation than there are chairs in this room. It's called the Dodd-Frank bill, and it regulates the financial industry. And as a result of the Dodd-Frank bill, if you had the ability and the creditworthiness to get the money, to borrow the investment money and put up some of your own to buy a McDonald's franchise, the Dodd-Frank bill has put so many regulations on these folks that the availability of capital, and capital is not a dirty word, capital is another word for investment money, the availability of capital for these small businesses is almost impossible. And yet our banks are overflowing with capital. And it's not that they don't want to make loans. It's first, small businessmen are scared of this environment and they don't want to borrow. But if they do want to borrow, the regulations have made it so difficult, they give up and they don't borrow the money. Bankers don't make a living if somebody doesn't borrow the money. That's how they make a living. So it's everything in our economy is interrelated and tied together. As we talk about small business, it is the driving force of the American economy. If you keep small business from creating new jobs, you keep our economy from growing. These regulations, and others we'll talk about in the future, are just that, job-killing regulations. And if they've killed existing jobs, they're certainly not going to be helpful in
the gentleman's
creating new
time
jobs.
has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time that you gave me tonight. I yield back whatever's left.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, it's an honor to speak on this floor where so much history has been made, where after Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt stood here in this hall and announced that was a day that would live in infamy. There have been some great Americans, different walks of life, ages, races, do great things in this hall. Sometimes we have to take a look and have some time of self-examination. 9/11, yesterday, 10 years after the worst attack in American history on our soil, is a good time to really take inventory of where we are, what have we learned, what have we done. Well, we know that we have 5 who helped organize 9/11. They were being held at Guantanamo Bay. The man who acknowledges his role, and most say he was the leader, the instigator, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is there. Very smart man. You can be smart and still be crazy. Very smart man. He had a lengthy hearing during which he was interviewed by the judge in the military commission trial down at Guantanamo Bay. I've been there a couple of times. The design of that courtroom is absolutely ideal for the kind of trial that was to take place there of those 5 defendants. But they announced they intended to plead guilty back in December of 2008. That was before the new administration, including our Attorney General Eric Holder, indicated that we wanted to give them a trial in New York City itself. We wanted to bring those people into the heart of Manhattan, where some estimated it would cost not merely millions, but potentially hundreds of millions for the security to have that trial there. And the fact was they'd already announced they were going to plead guilty. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed made very, very clear in a lengthy interview there in court. It's on the record. We have the verbatim interview where he, under oath, such as it was, admitted enough detail. It was very clear this man was behind the killing of thousands of Americans on 9/11. He's smart enough. He did his own translation and filed this pleading in response. The judge in the case before this administration took over was kind enough to declassify this pleading, and it can be found on my website at gohmert.house.gov. It can be found a number of places. The things he says are extraordinary, and of course he blames the United States. But just in case there are people, Mr. Speaker, that wonder, do we really have the right guys that organized, planned, plotted to kill innocent fathers and mothers and children? They're at the World Trade Centers, at the Pentagon, and yes, apparently even here at our nation's capital, that some say is the most recognized building in the entire world. Well, he says and this is just, he quotes from the Quran, and thank God that most Muslims do not believe jihad means what the radicals believe. But make no mistake, just as it was in Afghanistan, when the radical Islamists, the Taliban, took over Afghanistan, moderate Muslims were at risk, because to some like the Taliban, if you don't believe in Islam and the Quran exactly like they do, then you're eligible for a capital offense. You can be put to death. You're not a proper believer. You could be cast aside as an infidel. So moderate Muslims are every bit as much risk, even more so at times, than the rest of us infidels, according to the likes of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He quotes from the Quran in his pleading. It says in God's book, verse 9, Al-Tawbah, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them and besiege them, and lie in wait for them in each and every ambush. Down at the bottom of page 4 of his pleading, he says, we do not possess your military might, not your nuclear weapons. And parenthetically, I would interject, not yet. Iran is working on that, and certainly we can expect the terrorists will have the nuclear weapons once Iran has them. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, on behalf of himself and the other co-defendants, said, nevertheless, we fight you with the Almighty God, so if our act of jihad and our fighting with you cause fear and terror, then many thanks to God, because it is Him that has thrown fear into your hearts, which resulted in your infidelity, paganism, and your statement that God had a son, and your Trinity beliefs. Now, according to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a radical Islamist, the mere belief or statement that God had a son, or that there is a Holy Trinity, is a capital offense worthy of the death penalty, because you have associated some other person or entity with God. Then he quotes from the Quran. He says, God stated in His book, verse 151, Al-Imran, quote, soon shall we cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for that they join companies with Allah, for which He has sent no authority. Their place will be the fire, and evil is the home of the wrongdoers. So once again, in his own legal pleadings, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, on behalf of himself and 4 other co-defendants, makes clear he felt like they were justified in inflicting capital punishment on what those of us who are somewhat sane in the world would say was an act of hatred, an act of war, an act worthy of the death penalty itself. He goes on. There's quite a bit here in his 6-page pleading. But he says, he quotes from the Quran again. God has stated in His book, verse 14, Al-Hashir, they fight not against you even together, except in fortified townships or from behind walls. Their enmity among themselves is very great. You would think they were united, but their hearts are divided. That is because they are a people who understand not. He's right about that. As we have people who have tried to stand up and say, these guys are thugs, they're hateful, they're evil, They deserve the death penalty for what they have admitted under oath in court that they did. They deserve the death penalty. We have people running around saying, no, 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 let's give them a show trial. Let's spend hundreds of millions of dollars to give them a show trial so they can spew their venom and their hatred out on all the airways. That's not what they deserve under our system of justice. And people need to understand, Mr. Speaker, we go by the Constitution, and there's only one court created in the Constitution that is not created by the United States Congress, and that is the Supreme Court. As my constitutional law professor used to make very clear, David Gwynn would say, you know, if Congress has the power to create every court in the country, they have the power to dissolve them. They're congressionally created courts. Only the Supreme Court is a court. They can't mess with the jurisdiction that's set aside for them in the Constitution. We have the power under the Constitution to set up military commissions, tribunals. The Bush administration made a mistake initially trying to set up a military commission on its own. That was not constitutionally appropriate. The Constitution gives that power to Congress. So once that was struck down, then we did it here in Congress. 2006. Of course, it included some mean-spirited, nasty words about people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who rejoice at the terror Americans had on 9/11. They felt like enemy combatants was just too mean-spirited to call such a wondrous creature like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Let's be kinder and gentler with our treatment of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So in 2009, the democratically controlled House and Senate passed an amendment. We watered down enemy combatant. It was just so harsh about these fine people. They are now called officially unprivileged, alien, enemy belligerents. And I hope they don't take offense at being called enemies. But since they call us their enemies, then perhaps it's not too harsh. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, in his pleading, goes on. He says, we will make our materials available to defend and deter and egress you and the filthy Jews from our countries. Yeah, this wonderful creature, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, has a real love for our Jewish friends, both in the United States, in Israel, and around the world. What a good guy. I hope we didn't offend him by calling him an enemy belligerent or an enemy combatant. But he said, God has ordered us to spend for jihad in his cause. This is evident, he says, in many Quranic verses. He goes on and he says, we ask to be near to God. We fight you and destroy you and terrorize you. The jihad in God's cause is a great duty in our religion. We have news for you. The news is, these are Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's words, you will be greatly defeated in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that America will fall politically, militarily, and economically. Your end is very near, and your fall will be just as the fall of the towers on the blessed 9/11 day. We will raise from the ruins, God willing. We will leave this imprisonment with our noses raised high in dignity. As the lion emerges from his den, we shall pass over the blades of the sword into the gates of heaven. He said, so we ask from God to accept our contributions to the great attack on America, and to place our 19 martyred brethren among the highest peaks in paradise. Unprivileged, alien, enemy, belligerent, according to the democratically controlled House and Senate, 2009. He's not an enemy combatant. He's an unprivileged alien enemy belligerent who wants to destroy America. Now, I know there are many Christians that I've heard from who are really torn over this issue of how a Christian should respond to hateful, evil attacks as we experienced on 9/11. Some say, well, Jesus talked about turning the other cheek. Indeed, he did. His Beatitudes that he gave in his Sermon on the Mount make clear that war is not something an individual is supposed to declare on another individual. But, and I don't try to impose my religious beliefs on somebody else, but it's important to have these discussions since we, for a little while longer, have the freedom of speech and freedom of religion, even if we're not radical Islamists. So for a little while longer, we can discuss this publicly. Anyone who believes the New Testament has to believe the book of Romans as well. And when you get to Romans 13:4 and it says, if you do evil, be afraid. It says, for our government is God's minister to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid, for our government does not bear the sword in vain. Our government is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Those of us who believe all that's in the New Testament also believe Jesus' words that God does work things all together for good for those who love the Lord and called according to his purpose. I don't know what all good things will come from this act of sheer evil and hatred on 9/11. That much hate that could bring down that many people and that much in the way of structure on the heads, on the bodies of innocent men and women. But I do know we should learn lessons. This government, whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, whether you're the Jewish faith, whatever your faith, you have to understand there needs to be a government in order to maintain order in society. Because this is not a perfect world, and people are not perfect, and there will always be people bent on evil, bent on no good, and people who want to live in peace have to have governments in order to keep them safe, as safe can be in a world where people exist who want to do evil. Jesus did say, blessed are the peacemakers, but he also said, you know, if you say Raqqa, it was a crime back then, an offense, you'll have to answer the courts. He anticipated there had to be an orderly government where people had to answer for their offenses and crimes against others. This is the government. We, the people of the United States, are the government, and every couple of years there's a hiring day when people are supposed to examine the resumes, examine the backgrounds of those applying for the job to be servant. It's a hiring day. And we have a huge percentage of people who don't come out and even participate, even though they're the government and they're supposed to hire servants to come in here and do the job of protecting them. That's the government's role. On 9/11, we had people who did evil. If you believe Romans, they should be afraid. And there is nothing prohibitive in our United States Constitution of someone who is an enemy of the United States, is not American citizen, being tried in a military commission or tribunal, as long as it's set up by the Congress. There is nothing unconstitutional about that, no more than there is anything unconstitutional about the U.S. government trying people in the United States military under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. There's nothing inappropriate about that under our Constitution. That's why my 4 years in the Army, people I knew were court-martialed. And they were tried under those rules that would not meet the requirements for someone who is not in the military. But the Constitution anticipates different people in different circumstances could have different type of trials. Nothing unconstitutional about that. And someone who is a foreign enemy of the United States, who commits, participates, aids, abets, encourages an act of war against the United States, is worthy of being tried in a military tribunal, a military commission, and he's worthy of being put to death if capital punishment is the judgment of the tribunal or the commission. What is not worthy is people coming in and intervening when defendants who were responsible, admittedly over and over, for killing 3,000 Americans, and they're ready to plead guilty, they are pleading guilty, and they come in and say, not so fast. We want to give you a pulpit to spew your venom and hate and pay lots and lots of money. That's not worthy of this government. That's the way you lose countries, when people will not stand up when they are the government and defend the people they are charged with defending. Our role is to provide for the common defense against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that means people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others who would try to destroy this country and our freedoms. It should not happen. Do we wonder? Some people say, well, it's so inappropriate to talk about Christianity at all. The founders, we're told sometimes, they never meant for that kind of thing to go on. Well, let's see. I know my 4 years in the Army, I never had an officer who ordered that it was a violation, and it was a violation of his orders, not to take God's name in vain. We'd had a lot of people being court-martialed if that had been the case back when I was in, and I imagine that's true today. But Washington felt that we could not expect God to bless us and protect us and to help in the revolution if we were taking his name in vain, or soldiers were at the same time they were asking for his blessing. Washington said so many things, but he also ordered, this was an order May 2nd, 1778, to the troops at Valley Forge. Commander-in-Chief, and these are Washington's signed order, Commander-in-Chief directs that divine service be performed every Sunday at 11 o'clock in each brigade which has a chaplain. Those brigades which have none will attend the places of worship nearest to them. It is expected that officers of all ranks will, by their attendance, set it as an example for their men. While we are zealously performing the duties of good citizens and soldiers, we certainly ought not to be inattentive to the higher duties of religion. To the distinguished character of patriot, it should be our highest glory to laud the more distinguished character of Christian. And he did capitalize the word Christian. We're not advocating that everybody in America should be a Christian, because we have freedom to do whatever we wish. Worship, not worship. But it is not right to try to rewrite history, to say the things that happened did not happen, the things that we were founded on did not happen. Jefferson and Madison both attended church just down the hall. Each Sunday they were in Washington, D.C. at the biggest church in the District of Columbia. held in the House of Representatives. Thomas Jefferson not only did not think it was inappropriate or unconstitutional to have a non-denominational Christian worship service in the House of Representatives, but he often had the Marine Band come play hymns for their worship services. He's the guy that coined the phrase separation of church and state. When you hear someone say there's a wall of separation that the Constitution says we must have, that the Constitution says we must have separation of church and state, you know you may be dealing with an intelligent person, but you're dealing with an ignorant person, because those things are not in the Constitution. They were in a letter written to the Danbury Baptists by Thomas Jefferson. Or how about John Quincy Adams? He wrote this September 1811. So great is my veneration for the Bible, and so strong my belief, that when duly read and meditated on, it is of all books in the world that which contributes most to make men good, wise, and happy. That the earlier my children begin to read it, the more steadily they pursue the practice of reading it throughout their lives. The more lively and confident will be my hopes that they will prove useful citizens of their country, respectable members of society. And that's a man who believed he was called to run for the House of Representatives after he was defeated for a second term for president. Or how about this general order? President, Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy desires and enjoins the orderly observance of the Sabbath by the officers and men in the military and naval service. The importance for man and beast of the prescribed weekly rest, the sacred rights of Christian soldiers and sailors, a becoming deference to the best sentiment of a Christian people, and due regard for the divine will demand that Sunday labor in the Army and Navy be reduced to the measure of strict necessity. Oh, and by the way, this was Abraham Lincoln, his order as Commander-in-Chief. He said the discipline and character of the national forces should not suffer, nor the cause they defend be imperiled by the profanation of the day or name of the Most High. This time of public distress, adopting the words of Washington in 1776, men may find enough to do in the service of God and their country without abandoning themselves to vice and immorality. Abraham Lincoln also, in 1863, said this: "We have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and pray for clemency and forgiveness." We have such a rich heritage. But we need to understand where we come from if we're going to understand where we're going. How about Franklin D. Roosevelt's prayer on June 6, 1944, D-Day, when he knew thousands of Americans were being killed on the beaches of Normandy? And he led the nation in prayer over the radio. An emotional prayer it is. Can be found online without a problem. Jefferson's memorial shows this quote: "God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." Speaker, how much time?
2 minutes. The gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
I don't know what good God will work from the evil terror of 9/11. But I know something I saw on 9/11 and on 9/12, and this is the 10th anniversary of the day we came together as a nation like I'd never seen before. I went into the Army on active duty after Vietnam was over. It was not a good time to be in the military at all. We were sometimes ordered not to wear our uniforms off post at Fort Riley, occasionally at Fort Benning, because of violence that could be inflicted on military members if they were caught by themselves. It was not a good time. Been spit on in uniform. It was not a good time to be in the military. I really didn't think I would ever see the level of patriotism again people saw after World War II, and then came 9/11. And people in this country that had called police and law enforcement pigs, people who had been irritated and angry at fire department personnel because they were slowing things down, getting in the way, people who were upset with ambulances and EMTs for getting in their way, people who were upset with the military had a new, profound appreciation like could never have happened without those evil men committing those acts of hatred. That night of September 11th, 10 years ago, I went to a church I was not a member of, and we prayed. People from all walks, all ages, all races. We prayed together. We held hands. We asked God for protection like the children of Israel did when they knew they had no other place to turn but then the God, Jehovah. And the next day in our town square, like thousands and thousands of town squares around America, we gathered. We prayed. We spoke. We sang Amazing Grace. We sang God Bless America. That is a prayer. We held hands, and it hit me. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream of someday seeing people judged for the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And as I held hands and looked around at all these hundreds of people in our town square holding hands and being of one heart, it hit me a small glimpse of the dream he had. And it's beautiful. That day there were no Euro-Americans, there were no Anglo-Americans, African-Americans, Asian-Americans, Native Americans. There were no hyphenated Americans 10 years ago today. We were Americans, and may God grant that we will return to that sense of unity and purpose once again. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn. The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
So the House has gavelled out. On the agenda later this week, we expect completion of a bill dealing with charter school programs and debate and votes on a bill that would prevent the National Labor Relations Board from restricting a company's decision to relocate its operations. Live coverage when members return here on C-SPAN.
Tonight from the White House, remarks from President Obama on his jobs plan. After that, White House Budget Director Jack Lew on how the administration intends to pay for the plan. And later, House Armed Services Committee Chairman Buck McKeon on defense cuts and the budget deficit. Next, President Obama on his jobs plan and efforts to encourage Congress to pass the bill. He was joined by teachers, police officers, and firefighters. From the Rose Garden, this is just under 15 minutes.
Please, everybody, have a seat on this beautiful morning. It's wonderful to see all of you here. On Thursday, I told Congress that I'll be sending them a bill called the American Jobs Act. Well, here it is. This is a bill that will put people back to work all across the country. This is the bill that will help our economy in a moment of national crisis. This is a bill that is based on ideas from both Democrats and Republicans. And this is the bill that Congress needs to pass. No games, no politics, no delays. I'm sending this bill to Congress today, and they ought to pass it immediately. Now, standing with me this morning are men and women who will be helped by the American Jobs Act. I'm standing with teachers. All across America, teachers are being laid off in droves, which is unfair to our kids. It undermines our future, and it is exactly what we shouldn't be doing if we want our kids to be college ready and then prepared for the jobs of the 21st century. We've got to get our teachers back to work. Let's pass this bill and put them in the classroom where they belong. I'm standing here with veterans. We've got hundreds of thousands of brave, skilled Americans who fought for this country. The last thing they should have to do is to fight for a job when they come home. So let's pass this bill and put the men and women who serve this nation back to work. We're standing here with cops and firefighters whose jobs are threatened because states and communities are cutting back. This bill will keep cops on the beat and firefighters on call. So let's pass this bill so that these men and women can continue protecting our neighborhoods like they do every single day. I'm standing with construction workers. We've got roads that need work all over the country. Our highways are backed up with traffic. Our airports are clogged. And there are millions of unemployed construction workers who can rebuild them. So let's pass this bill. So road crews and diggers and pavers and workers, they can all head back to the job site. There's plenty of work to do. This jobs bill will help them do it. Let's put them back to work. Let's pass this bill, Rebuilding America. And there are schools throughout the country that desperately need renovating. We cannot, got an amen over there. We can't expect our kids to do their best in places that are literally falling apart. This is America. Every kid deserves a great school, and we can give it to them. Pass this bill, and we put construction crews back to work across the country repairing and modernizing at least 35,000 schools. I'm standing here with small business owners. They know that while corporate profits have come roaring back, a lot of small businesses haven't. They're still struggling, getting the capital they need, getting the support they need in order to grow. So this bill cuts taxes for small businesses that hire new employees and for small businesses that raise salaries for current employees. It cuts your payroll tax in half, and all businesses can write off investments they make this year and next year. Instead of just talking about America's job creators, let's actually do something for America's jobs creators. We can do that by passing this bill. Now, there are a lot of other ways that this jobs bill, the American Jobs Act, will help this economy. It's got a $4,000 tax credit for companies that hire anybody who's spent more than 6 months looking for a job. We've got to do more for folks who've been hitting the pavement every single day looking for work but haven't found employment yet. That's why we need to extend unemployment insurance and connect people to temporary work to help upgrade their skills. This bill will help hundreds of thousands of disadvantaged young people find summer jobs next year, jobs that will help set the direction for their entire lives. And the American Jobs Act would prevent taxes from going up for middle-class families. If Congress does not act, just about every family in America will pay more taxes next year. And that would be a self-inflicted wound that our economy just can't afford right now. So let's pass this bill and give the typical working family a $1,500 tax cut instead. And the American Jobs Act is not going to add to the debt. It's fully paid for. I want to repeat that. It is fully paid for. It's not going to add a dime to the deficit. Next week I'm laying out my plan not only to pay for this jobs bill, but also to bring down the deficit further. It's a plan that lives by the same rules that families do. We've got to cut out things that we can't afford to do in order to afford the things that we really need. It's a plan that says everybody, including the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations, have to pay their fair share. So the bottom line is, when it comes to strengthening the economy and balancing our books, we've got to decide what our priorities are. Do we keep tax loopholes for oil companies, or do we put teachers back to work? Should we keep tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires? Or should we invest in education and technology and infrastructure, all the things that are going to help us out-innovate and out-educate and out-build other countries in the future? We know what's right. We know what will help businesses start right here and stay here and hire here. We know that if we take the steps outlined in this jobs plan, that there's no reason why we can't be selling more goods all around the world that are stamped with those three words, Made in America. That's what we need to do to create jobs right now. Now, I have to repeat something I said in my speech on Thursday. There are some in Washington who'd rather settle our differences through politics and the elections than try to resolve them now. In fact, Joe and I, as we were walking out here, we were looking at, one of the Washington newspapers, and it was quoting a Republican aide saying, "I don't know why we'd want to cooperate with Obama right now. It's not good for our politics." That was very explicit. It was. I mean, that's the attitude in this town. Yeah, we've been for these things before, but I don't know why we'd be for them right now. Fact of the matter is, the next election is 14 months away. And the American people don't have the luxury of waiting 14 months for Congress to take action. Folks are living week to week, paycheck to paycheck. They need action. And the notion that there are folks who would say, we're not going to try to do what's right for the American people because we don't think it's convenient for our politics, we've been seeing that too much around here. And that's exactly what folks are tired of. And that's okay when things are going well. You play politics. It's not okay at a time of great urgency and need all across the country. These aren't games we're playing out here. Folks are out of work. Businesses are having trouble staying open. You've got a world economy that is full of uncertainty right now. In Europe, in the Middle East. Some events may be beyond our control. But this is something we can control. Whether or not we pass this bill, whether or not we get this done, that's something that we can control. That's in our hands. You hear a lot of folks talking about uncertainty in the economy. This is a bit of uncertainty that we could avoid by going ahead and taking action to make sure that we're helping the American people. So if you agree with me, if you want Congress to take action, then I'm going to need everybody here and everybody watching. You've got to make sure that your voices are heard. Help make the case. There's no reason not to pass this bill. Its ideas are bipartisan. Its ideas are common sense. It will make a difference. That's not just my opinion. Independent economists and validators have said this could add a significant amount to our gross domestic product and could put people back to work all across the country. So the only thing that's stopping it is its politics. And we can't afford these same political games, not now. So I want you to pick up the phone. I want you to send an email. Use one of those airplane skywriters. Dust off the fax machine. Or you can just, like, write a letter. So long as you get the message to Congress. Send me the American Jobs Act so I can sign it into law. Let's get something done. Let's put this country back to work. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless.